So why the system of lottery? Why does it have to be random? What's the justification for doing it that way?
Well, I think the view is that that's fair. Okay. That it's a public institution. Demand exceeds supply. In the private sector, we use prices to solve that problem. But the idea of public schools is that that would not be appropriate. You don't want to let the public schools charge whatever the market will bear. You want to have equal access. So since not everybody can have everything they want in life, you have to come up with a system to allocate it. I should point out that lotteries are not unique to charters. Regular Boston public schools, regular New York City public schools with its 3 million students, Denver public schools, New Orleans public schools, Newark public schools, all of these districts involve systems where there are many children and many schools, and not everybody can go to the school that they want. These are districts that allow choice. In the old days, when I was growing up in the 1960s, I grew up in Pittsburgh, a sort of middling-sized city. You just went to the school in your neighborhood. You had no choice. But urban districts today want to allow choice for a variety of reasons. One is there was the view that neighborhood schools promoted racial segregation because neighborhoods are segregated by race. So the Supreme Court in some cases won't allow neighborhood schools or has not allowed. And then there's the view that parents should have some choice. Well, once you have choice, you have things people want and things people don't want. So you can't have everybody going to the same school. It's not big enough. So all of those systems now have an element of random assignment. Of course, that makes us happy. We use that for research gladly. But I think also it's a reasonable way to do it.
But if I understood correctly, it's only after they're oversubscribed. So
well, if you're not oversubscribed, you don't need a lottery.
Exactly. So what proportion of students end up being part of that lottery?
Yeah, that's a great question. So most of the charter high schools are oversubscribed, at least in some years. Okay. Typically, the sort of life of a school is a new school is undersubscribed. So when it first opens, it's undersubscribed. People forget that. It's, oh, yeah, it's such a great school. Well, they don't remember 5 years ago when it opened that it was undersubscribed. But eventually, it'll become more popular and it'll become oversubscribed. Some schools are never oversubscribed. In other work, we've shown that those are often not very good schools, and the odds are often that they'll eventually close. They'll either be closed or they will close of their own. That's in the charter sector. In the traditional public schools, many schools are not oversubscribed, in fact, in the traditional public sector, but some are heavily oversubscribed.
Okay, so what I was trying to get at, because that's a big debate here, is if some schools are not oversubscribed and those which are oversubscribed actually only allow a small proportion of the pupils through the lottery system, are the effects that you're seeing perhaps a consequence of the fact that the profile of those students is different from those from state schools?
So we look at that. That's a good question. There is some selection into who applies. Yeah. And now most of the schools are represented, but not all of the children are represented. There's a distribution of characteristics among applicants. The applicants, in the social science jargon, we see the applicants are somewhat positively selected, and that means that they have somewhat better in the sense of predicting outcomes. They are higher income than the average student and so on. Everybody in Boston, I should say, is poor. And they're almost all non-white. But relative to that distribution, there's some positive selection. On the other hand, when you investigate it by subgroups, you see that it's the lower income, low baseline kids who benefit the most. So we can investigate that. And the positive selection means that the gains would be even larger if we could draw in more low-income children. So one of the things that my group is always promoting is centralized assignment, we would like Boston to adopt the mechanism that's used in New Orleans. New Orleans, after Hurricane Katrina, is essentially, it's a city being rebuilt. All its institutions are being rebuilt after everything was destroyed in the hurricane. One of the things that's being rebuilt there is the entire school system. The post-Katrina New Orleans school system is a mostly charter district, and it uses one application for all schools. So you rank all your schools, charters and publics. You could imagine such a thing in Spain. I don't know that it's realistic that it would ever.
Ranking the schools?
Yeah.
No, you can't imagine it.
Well, you can imagine it. You shouldn't wait for it, perhaps.
Well, we're suggesting it.
Yeah. So the way it works in New Orleans is you rank all your schools. The parents rank the schools. The schools have priorities. Priorities are restricted to walk zone. So there's priorities for kids in the neighborhood, and there's priorities for siblings. There are no other priorities allowed. There's no other selection on the school side. And then the families list 10 schools. Then there's a match. The match uses an algorithm similar to deferred acceptance. It's called top trading cycles, and ties are broken by lottery. So we like that system because it's efficient. We think it serves parents well, and in particular it serves low-income parents well because it makes it easier for them. It's just one form. In Boston, the way it works now is the parent every parent who lives in Boston has to fill out the Boston mechanism sheet, and then they have to apply to each charter. And since that requires some effort and some information gathering, and it's not very well publicized, I think that turns into socioeconomic differences in application rates that a centralized system would help eliminate. But that's a big fight, actually, as well.
I don't know if you have enough information about the single-sex school. You have charters. I mean, is a
we don't have any in
big
Boston.
enough as to be able to compare results of co-educational school and going back to the thing of the gender problem.
Yeah, no, we don't have single-sex charters. Single-sex is a problem in the U.S. It's single-sex public school. It always somebody tries that once in a while. It usually generates court challenges. It's not easy to do that. There's some interesting research on single-sex education. Israel has single-sex religious schools that are publicly funded. Some other countries, I think, as well. In the U.S., that would not likely catch on and become a very important thing in the public sector.
I would like to ask you if you have told us that some Boston public schools are also oversubscribed.
Yes.
Only some of them. Have you tried the same analysis that you have done here for charter schools?
So actually, well, we did the pilots. Pilots are public schools that use the mechanism, and the pilots that are oversubscribed can be evaluated by lottery, and we saw that the pilots were not generating gains. But right now we're doing the entire Boston system, so we're going to look at value-added models using lotteries. There's some technical problems with that, so it's going to take a while, but we will be doing that. The most in-demand traditional public schools are just as heavily oversubscribed as the most in-demand charters. So in principle, you can use the lotteries to study any school. It doesn't have to be a charter school. But once you sort of mix in that some are oversubscribed and some are not, it gets a little messy. So we're working on that.